Welcome back. You're watching The Fix with me, Karima Brown. I'm in conversation with the National Treasury Director General, Mr. Dondo Mogajane. Before the break, Director General, we were talking about the fact that obviously these institutions will give us conditionalities. You said we've got an interest rate of 1% to repay. What kind of room exists for you to dictate terms, or is it so dire that South Africa is going cap in hand and in no way able to dictate any kinds of terms with these institutions?
Karima, it's not about dictating terms, and the situation is not that dire in the way you put it. But the reality is that resources are needed, and let's make it clear. They made it clear. The IMF made it clear that it's not that there are not conditionalities. But one can imagine if you go to a bank or a mashonisa and ask for money, they will give you conditions. They will say, pay me in 3 to 5 years. You will pay 1%, and you can only use this money to do the following, and not money to go and buy arms of things like those. I can imagine there'll be some broad agreements that talks to what the money is going to be used for. And as I said earlier, I'm not, and we shouldn't actually compromise the sovereignty of South Africa in coming to these broad agreements. Some of those
Absolutely. DG, let me come in here. Let me just come in here. You actually made a very good example. You said if you go to a bank or a machinista, now a lot of critics from the IMF and the World Bank would actually compare the IMF and the World Bank to machinistas who set unreasonable demands for repayments, often resulting in difficulties for the people who borrow. And this has been the problem with structural adjustment. What are you going to make? What are you going to do to ensure, for example, that the World Bank and the IMF doesn't operate like a mashonista?
This rapid finance, firstly, mashonista will be 3 or 4 times the rate of interest. So, at least there we know it's 1%, far cheaper than what other people charge out there. Secondly, we shouldn't forget, the IMF and the World Bank and all these institutions, we're not in the 1970s anymore. I've said it, and it's important that we recognize that we are not. If you look at what we did when we went to the World Bank 10 years ago with the ESCOM loan, we dictated. At the time, the World Bank was talking about the development policy loan that will have impacted on some of the broad macroeconomic stance that we took at the time. And we said, no, you will not give money to government. You will definitely give it to ESCOM and not through us. And it will be a specific investment loan. So the conversations 10 years ago with the World Bank was totally different. Now it's the same. This rapid finance instrument, it's urgent, it's quick. I don't think we will obviously be subject to any conditionality that are going to be onerous on South Africa, and that will guard at all costs. But however, one expects that there are certain things that ourselves have said in our own documentation, whether it's around structural reform, whether it's around ensuring that debt sustainability is there, ensuring that we don't burden future generations in terms of the choices, the fiscal choices that we take. Those are things, and if they want to hold us committed to things that we said in the past that we'll do, I guess that will be welcomed, and it's not conditionalities that are going to be onerous. And be rest assured, Karima.
Director General, let me just bring you back to the monies that have been rolled out. You are rolling out a 325 Rand monthly grant for food poverty, or rather for those who don't have anything. These are for people who have fallen through the cracks. But analysts have said that the food poverty line in South Africa is 561. So there's quite a big gap between that 325 Rand and the poverty line, which sits at 561. When are we going to get to a situation where the South African National Treasury accepts the necessity for a basic income grant that is, the more longer term and more sustainable and comprehensive measure?
Can we afford it? No. If we afford it, then maybe a conversation then will be relevant. I think we are making interventions now that are as a result of a pandemic that has never ever happened. So I think it must be understood in that context that we are opening a room and an opportunity for really make sure that we make interventions in the most vulnerable. This is the people that you referred as the missing middle. Secondly, I think if we grow and we pay our taxes and we use the money sparingly and efficiently, then we are able to do many, many things. Think about when we grew at 3, 5, or even 5.5% in the early 2000s. What did we do? We increased child support grant from 8.7, and now it's almost around 18 or so.
Yeah.
So you can imagine when money is available and we are doing well, and the economy is growing and tax revenues are, then we can open a conversation for a basic income grant. But if people are pushing us for a basic income grant, I can tell you that debt to GDP is going to be 200%.
So
and that's,
are you saying,
as
the Director General of Treasury, from what you've just said, DG, am I to understand that the position of National Treasury as it stands is that we cannot afford a basic income grant right now?
It cannot be afforded at all in this current context, especially with the current debt environment that we're in and the current spending challenges that we're in currently. But interventions, the vulnerable have to be supported, and I think we're making huge interventions. Almost more than 12 million people on a monthly basis are getting some kind of form of support, and I think South Africa should be commended. Actually, we are commended by many countries, by many peers in the world, that in the current context, we are able to still give old age grant, still be able to do social relief of distress, including child support grant and disability grant, etc. So I think we are making interventions, but if the economy grows and we've got the resources, we will definitely be able to think about other things that can cushion the impact and create jobs. There might not even be a need for basic income grant if the economy is doing well, because more people will be employed, and that should be our first target. And I think we've got the basis.
DG, you're getting away from the point. The point is people are not able to feed themselves. We've got starvation. We've got massive amounts of people that are unemployed, and the economy was doing poorly in terms of job creation. This idea that when things open up that we're going to go back and that suddenly the economy is going to boom, I mean, even you need to must accept that that is not necessarily going to be the case. Why are you so emphatic that the BIG is not an option when many economists, as much as 170 economists, have written to President Ramaphosa and argued for this intervention as the most sustainable way to help those that are not employed and to help the working poor as they lose jobs?
We've got a minimum of 14.5 million South Africans who are poor and very vulnerable. No doubt, they need some form of income and support. But my point currently, Karima, is that it is not affordable. My point is that we don't have the resources. And my point is that either we then can choose. We have to choose. Then do we increase? Do we borrow more? We are downgraded. It's expensive. Do we borrow more? Because the only way to fund a basic income grant currently will be when we print more money, and that's the wrong option. We don't want to be like other countries, and I can give examples, other countries that have gone that route, where they printed money, they were in trouble. We have to be responsible, and for future generations, preserve the bit that we have, while still making meaningful interventions for our people, and I think that should be noted.
Director General, let me come to the point around the assistance that you're seeking from the private sector. The finance minister said, this is not just going to be government, it's going to be the private sector. So one of the ways in which the private sectors come to the party is, of course, through giving people some relief in terms of bond repayments. But these loans may or may not happen. I mean, the Financial Times and the Business Day said that, there is no guarantee that these loans or this amount will eventually flow into businesses. So if there's no guarantee, why are you counting it as part of the 500 billion rand stimulus? Aren't you being a bit disingenuous with the numbers?
Let's test it and let's go for it. 200 billion credit guarantees been made available to the banks. I don't think we're going to walk away and not look into what exactly it is. We're in discussion with them. And by the way, I must be, this came from them. It didn't come from us. It's a proposal that they made. We went deeper into the proposal. They will make cheap loans available to businesses. They will make sure that businesses don't close down. They'll make sure that
there's a big if, Director General. Just a quick one. Just a quick one also. On the tax relief, the minister made a lot about the tax deferrals. But some analysts are also saying that you can't really count the tax revenue deferrals as stimulus because they are part of the same fiscal year. What do you say to your critics on that?
We are saying, we give you some relief as a business, and that relief must be passed on to employees. Don't retrench. don't fire anybody, don't close your business, and that's why I think it's an option that I think makes sense at this point in time, because we are supporting businesses for them not to close down. We will be supporting spaza shops not to close down because they're important. So I think we have to choose. Either we then leave things and things collapse to a point where we have to. President said we are in a war environment. In a war environment, and war has ravaged countries, we have seen the remnants of what happens. When basically the war has destroyed, it takes long to rebuild. But all we are saying is that in that environment, let's support and preserve so that when we start rebuilding after COVID-19, then we rebuild not starting from scratch and without having people lost their jobs and firms and companies having closed down. That's what the intention is. We want to make sure that firms don't close down. We want to ensure that people don't lose their jobs. And that's why the tax relief, and that's why the support that we were putting, including, by the way, creating new opportunities for jobs to be created.
All right, DG, we're going to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thank you so much to the National Treasury's Director General, Mr. Dondo Mogajane. Still ahead on the fix, Transport Minister Fikile Mbalula joins me to speak on reimagining the transport sector in the era of COVID-19. Stay with us.